Well, good to be with you. Another Kardia conversation. And I'm here with one of our providers, Dr. Jason Stubbs. I've thoroughly enjoyed getting to know Jason, getting to know you over the last, I guess, maybe a year and a half now. I don't know, how's it been?
Yeah,
since we first met?
Year anniversary, yeah.
Okay.
Official, but.
So Jason is a man of many talents and cultural experiences. So tell us first how you got into the field of counseling and some of your educational pursuits and passions and interests, because that covers a pretty broad swath.
Yeah, we can spend the whole time about that.
We could.
Born and raised in Bahamas, of course, you could tell over time. This accent will give it away. Born and raised in Bahamas. Came from a pretty rough family with mental challenges, and saw it growing up with several of my aunts and uncle. And so I began a passion in the social service field at first, thinking how can we provide resources and things like that, and then came over to go to college and to study, to my bachelor's in psychology. Had a different plan though. I changed my mind. I wanted to go to law school. I figured if I could go to law school, I could make more money. But that shifted, and I came to America 23 years ago now.
Wow.
Can't believe it. Dang. To saying it.
And you're only 25.
Yeah,
so.
I'm only 25.
Right.
I don't know what happened. Saying it becomes more real. And so that's my journey in that regards.
Was when you were growing up, what was the perspective or perception of counseling? Was that common and normalized? Okay.
Absolutely not.
Right.
In Afro-Caribbean context, you don't go to counseling.
Okay.
And as a matter of fact, the field just really expanded within the last 10 to 15 years in the Caribbean, much less Bahamas, the context I came from. And you did not want to be branded as crazy.
And if you went to counseling?
Yeah, well, you didn't.
That was the risk. Yeah, okay.
You didn't go. And in those who may watch this in the Afro-Caribbean Bahamas context would know if you got the pink slip, it was called the pink slip. So when you go to the doctor, you would either get a yellow slip, that means you went to the doctor, or if you get the pink one, that was the mental hospital one.
Really?
So you would hide the pink slip. The pink slip was you either got medication or referred for counseling. So there still exists a stigma today to the fact that we've been in existence for 50 years and they just passed a mental health act last year. So it wasn't a big deal in the country. They're taking it more serious now with the increase on suicide, and so it was a part of helping write that bill, and they passed it last year.
Well, I was gonna divert a little bit to talk about that because I know you've been involved, and I don't know to what degree, but what was your involvement in that and your engagement with helping advance that?
Yeah, I'm part of Bahamas Psychological Association. The component I was involved is in regards to adolescence. Did my dissertation on adolescent psychopathology, so they wanted me to be a part of speaking into what that looks like for adolescents. How are they, put away? How are they remanded for mental health treatment? How do we assess them? How do we diagnose? Different things like that. And so helped to craft the conversation around what became now legislation, Mental Health Act 2022 in Bahamas. And so it was arduous. It was a 2-year process.
Wow.
Back and forth, different mindsets, different thoughts. And I'm just happy that we have something now. And it's always open to amendment because now it's opening the door for some other conversations, in regards to mental health treatment.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. So when you started pursuing that field, how did your family and community respond to that?
It wasn't a good response. It was, why do you want to do that? You ain't gonna make no money. Nobody going to see nobody. And you should go back and be a lawyer, that's you're gonna make money. People are always gonna need a lawyer. Now the lawyers are calling us and seeking us out. And so now it's shifted. I think more people are more open. I'm talking about my family now.
Right.
They're more open to it. Now I can't get them to go. Of course I can't see them, but I can't get them to go. But they're more open to it. I will say that. They're more open. And with some recent issues in our family, we've had some people say, I'm gonna give it a try. Went one time, that was it.
Right. Well, and that touches on something that I think is probably not too uncommon is that if you're and we can move into this whole idea of a family being a system. I remember one of the things that Tim Holler had encouraged me with early on. He said one of the greatest things I could do for my family is to get as healthy as I possibly could, because I think my activistic kind of maybe even savior complex was like, I'm going to help everybody else,
Right.
versus doing the most responsible thing for me. So how would you encourage and speak to somebody who is maybe in a system that isn't proactive in their own recovery or care and pursuing their own mental health? How do you navigate that?
Well, that's a pretty challenging system, what you're describing. And I always encourage people, whether I see them on the linear perspective or the systemic perspective, linear being seeing them one-on-one, systemic being seeing mom and child, mom and dad and child, mom, dad, aunt, uncle and child. I always encourage and let people know, first off, the system is a big deal, number one. Number two, we're all a part of the system. So you being healthy first is for you, knowing that you're part of the system. So someone who has a system that's challenging, I always encourage them, if there's some things in the system you can't change, start with what you can, which is you. And hopefully it will impact the system. Because either it'll impact how you respond to what is happening or how you receive what is happening. You can't control how what is happening from the people in the system, but how you respond can either inflame or deflate what's going on in the system. So I always encourage people from that perspective. You gotta take control and charge of what you can, which is you. But I still always engage it from the systemic approach. So, one person can't argue with themselves. We label them schizophrenic, but you can't argue with one person, it has to be someone else. So if you say something that's inflammatory to me, if you call me, baldy, I'm at a place now in my life where I've learned how to respond to that.
Right.
And rather than react, I would react at first, but I've learned to respond. And I've learned that in the system, you have to be prepared for any and everything. And what I can control is Jason's response. I can't control what you say. I can't control you calling me baldy, but I can control how I respond to you calling me baldy.
So to talk a little more about the systems approach, because I know that's something you're passionate about, and my suspicion is, what I've heard you say, I think, is you prefer to work with the system than just linearly, eventually working with the system. So talk a little bit about your approach to that and help us understand more of what you mean. I mean, when you talk about a system or a family system.
So when I encourage people about the systems approach, what we do is we help people understand, when you think of where you were raised, how the world you live in, how you view the world you live in, it's all fueled by who you were raised around, the context you were raised. So for example, there's a statement I remember hearing growing up: children live what they learn and learn what they live. Children live what they learn and learn what they live. And when you talk with people and you ask them, tell me how you saw this when you were growing up. And they tell you, and then they say, how are you doing this now? And then they stop and they're like, is that a trick question? Because I think I just answered my question by telling you what I saw growing up. And a lot of times, either we do what we saw growing up, or there's some semblance of that, or we're actually fighting against what we grew up with. We're trying to not do that. So it's always this fight, this tension. And so basically the systemic process says everything that you are exposed to, everything you are a part of, impacts your development, your perspective, your responses, your reactions. And so that's important for people to understand, that everything, even if you're a linear type therapist, I always joke and say they want the easy way out, because it's easy to work with one person. You bring a whole family in, you got Family Feud.
Right.
But you deal with one person, you can just deal with their issues and how they feel about what's going on with the family, and I'll see you next time.
Well, and only that one perspective. I mean, because I can only see so much from my own perspective versus how other people are experiencing me. Yeah, so I can see how that can get messy real fast.
Oh yeah, I call it Family Feud. And I think the systemic approach to has some benefits. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm saying that's just the one I choose to engage and approach. The systemic approach has a benefit of people understanding not only their perspective, but how someone else is responding or reacting to them. So for example, I grew up in a system where discipline was a non-negotiable. And when I share this with people, they like you just did, I haven't even shared it yet.
I'm imagining what kind of discipline.
Yeah.
I know, well, and that's from my system.
Right.
I know what discipline meant in my world.
Right. And so in the system I grew up, the discipline didn't come from my dad. He was, I think I got a spanking. Y'all say spanking in America, we say a beating. I got a spanking from my dad maybe twice. My mom, I can't even count. You know, so the system was, and I grew up in a 2-parent home, the system was very matriarchal led.
And was that unique to you culturally, or was that kind of the cultural norm in the Bahamas?
It was against the cultural norm.
Okay.
And I think some of it had to do with presence. You know, my dad worked more. I think some of it had to do with spiritual context. My dad and mom, 2 different faith backgrounds. I don't want to call denominational titles, but
right.
They were Protestant.
She didn't spare the rod.
No, she did not spare the rod. She was very literal.
Right.
And my dad was more gracious, but still firm. But my mom was the more,
right.
You know, if I look at you.
A little more heavy-handed.
Yeah. And so even that, you know, coming from that perspective where, you know, I think for me, my value, again, the system taught me you respect women, whether earned or given. Women had a sense of authority. And so coming to a different context and culture where women are given less stance and voice in society, it threw me in dissonance, cognitive dissonance, because I was like, okay, whoa, what? Your mama just said that to you and you didn't listen to her?
Right. Yeah.
That doesn't happen. And so even that system where mom and dad would collaborate on things, mom and dad would demonstrate affection publicly, mom and dad would have arguments in front of us publicly because they wanted us to see it's okay to argue and have healthy arguments. You don't have to go in the room and hide. You can have healthy arguments and then mom gets smacked on the butt afterwards. You're like, what? What is happening? So that context taught me things that I see myself even today. Now, I think I was saying earlier, I think the resiliency that I think I have today now is based on the context that I was in. For example, growing up in poverty, now this is Afro-Caribbean poverty. My friends, when they came and visited when I was in college, they looked at me and laughed and said, "You call this poverty? Like, look out the window. There's the ocean."
The view, yeah. You've got $1 billion view.
Like, what?
Right.
I was like, but this is what we call the hood.
Right.
Like, okay, we can handle this, I'm thinking. But growing up, I tell people, I didn't learn what a steak was until I went to so let me back up a little bit. My parents, poverty, when I say poverty, for the context was, we were middle, lower class, to put in context. My dad was a security officer. My mom was a guidance counselor, but she went full-time to raise us. So my dad was the only income. My mom was bringing in the most money. Again, that'll come clear when we talk a little bit more. And so I didn't know what steak was until I went to one of my friends who went to the private Catholic school I went to. His family was like, "We want him to come over. Jamie wants to hang out, blah, blah, blah." It was a white Bahamian family. And went over and they had this meat, this mysterious meat to me. And I was just eating everything else but this meat.
That did not come out of the ocean.
No, that's a whole other thing.
Right.
And that was something that was normal for them. And me seeing that, I said, wow, And then going home and saying, hey, they had this. She was like, oh, okay. For us, a big meal was chicken drumsticks, chicken thighs, fried or baked. Baked was more special. Baked with barbecue sauce, with coleslaw, macaroni, rice, potato salad. That was like a big meal. Average meal was corned beef, white rice, corn, and that was our average meal. And so, but in the Caribbean, in Bahamas, that was, corned beef meal was called the pauper's meal. We call it fire engine, okay?
Fire engine?
Fire engine, yeah. I don't know why they call it fire engine.
Is it spicy?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We cook everything that's spicy.
Yeah, I was going to say, jerk chicken.
Yeah, fire engine. And so, steaks and all that stuff. Now, seafood, lobster and all that was, again, high holy meals. I remember eating fish mainly like Easter coming up.
Right.
Easter time was fish, and I'm not talking about snapper, I'm talking about grouper. Grouper's the steak of the ocean. Things like that. Lobster tail. When you had that, it was a big deal.
Right.
And they saved to get that. So coming from all that, not having enough, seeing one can of tuna too was a big meal. Even to this day, one of the things I told my wife I like is grits and tuna for breakfast. Now, some Americans are like, what? But with some lime on that, tuna. And even today, I'm introducing my kids to that. I'm introducing my family, my wife to it, who they didn't experience that. But it's now I don't see it as a poor person's meal. I see it as a reflection of where I came from and teaching them there's nothing wrong with this meal. So the context taught me, I came to an understanding that we were in poverty. I came to an understanding that the system works together, that mom and dad can have differences but still love each other, even though they're married in it with separation. That's a whole nother systemic thing. I was in college at that time. But the system taught me resilience that I didn't even know I was operating in. Living in a 2-bedroom house, going to someone's house that was a mansion to me. It was 5 bedrooms. I could echo. It was like, I was more amazed by stupid things in this house rather than, things that were more, people say, wow, let's look at this. I was like, it echoes.
Right.
Wow, there's 3 bathrooms. Wow, there's running water. You didn't have to bathe in a silver tub, and get the water from the pump, and because we didn't have running water for a period of time. There was times it could turn off if they didn't have money. Sometimes it'd be on. So the silver tub is we would, go to the pump with we call it a trolley. Y'all call it a buggy. Take the trolley to the pump, fill up your bottles, bring it back, pour it in, and hot water was. We didn't think to have hot water. We knew you had pump temperature water.
Right.
That's what you took a bath with. And so you go to a house and you see the shower, okay, I'm gonna take a shower. You're gonna take a what? That was, again, I learned these things when I got out, realizing they taught me something that I didn't anticipate, I didn't know. And so it built this form of resilience that I didn't even know was being built. But on the flip side of that, it didn't, and I think their goal wasn't to make me feel bad or anything. Their goal was, you be content in whatever state you are. There was no strive to get rich, strive to get, the biggest thing I heard was get your education. They could take away money, they could take away your house, but they can't take away what's in your head. So that was really the big thrust of that. And so that's some context of the system.
The system, and you've mentioned resiliency a few times, which I think is a word that gets tossed around a good bit, but unpack that further of how you describe resiliency in the context of the system, how you experience that, and then even kind of maybe look at what you're seeing today in your work with kids and families.
Yeah. Well, if I would give a definition of resilience, just a basic definition, I'd say it's a bounce back. How do you bounce back? I think today you're right. The word does get thrown around, but I don't think it gets thrown around appropriately. I think resilience is something that we all have some ounce of, but I think the goal for me in systemic therapy is to get it to where it develops a pattern where we are consistently bouncing back.
Which also implies consistently facing obstacles or struggles right.
Absolutely.
But that's part of the rhythm versus something to avoid, I guess,
right. Absolutely. And if you go back to COVID-19, post-COVID now, we all, I heard someone say in a seminar, they said, everyone pull out your DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. I want you to diagnose America. And, we all both said, we're all traumatized. COVID traumatized us. And that, in essence, that is somewhat true. But we all had to demonstrate some form of resilience, bounce back, because we had to get back into society. We had to get back to face-to-face communication.
Choose to re-engage.
Yeah. And some people still haven't. They still, want to be behind the computer. Or, we had to get back to certain things. And even coming out of it, we faced and met some things that were challenging. Gas prices were high. Food in the grocery store was high. the magic word, gotta whisper it, inflation. We met inflation now, it's and so now it's forcing us to face resilience, face on. We can't avoid it, We were all thrust into this time where we had to be thinking, what's next? And so, I think resiliency then for today and what I'm seeing is something that I'm seeing less of. And but on the flip side of it, I'm seeing more of it in the younger ones than the older. And I don't know if it's fatigue, emotional fatigue, resiliency fatigue, if that's a term. People are just tired. They're overwhelmed. The theme I've been seeing within the last 12 to 18 months is I'm just overwhelmed. And I don't know if it's not just resiliency or the system or both. And I think it's both, to be honest with you. I think the system hadn't learned how to be resilient. And so
the family system specifically,
Yeah. And what's happened is, so for example, when you think of when we were in the pandemic, most people weren't coaching their kids for, all right, when we go back, this is how we're gonna go back. We're gonna face this.
Or here's how we'll capitalize on this, or here's how we'll take advantage of this, or here's why this is a unique opportunity, or those perspectives.
Yeah, we were all, you gotta be home. I don't know how to do your schoolwork. Get in front of the computer. Why aren't they on today? We were more concerned with the mundane things of being home. And even being home, we saw an increase in spousal abuse. We saw an increase in emotional dysregulation. We saw an increase of mental challenges. So regulation coupled with resilience has been something that's been a theme I've been seeing. And so the system, I think, from COVID even, and again, I'm trying not to make it about COVID.
Sure, it's a good example though of an acute, that everybody can relate to.
Yeah, we see this thing that's emerged where we don't have a lot of resilient people facing things head on with resilience. And so now even in the kids, I've been seeing this spike in resilience, but almost a lack of acknowledging reality of what's going on. For example, I have a kid who in the last year, between the months of September, December, even in our region, you would, if you were to Google these people, you would have seen them on the news. That's what I did, because he told me and I Googled it. All his family members shot, killed. 2 of them, or 3 of them he saw right in front of him. Child is 16 years old, going on 17, the end of next week actually. And, talking about it, I can feel the resilience. How you feel about it? Well, we walk through the grief stages, all this. I feel like I'm walking through the grief stage with him every other week. It's been, calm now, no issues. But then on the flip side of that, we see this lack of reality of that was traumatic for you. Where is what you're dealing with? Where are you when you try to engage what you're dealing with? It's almost like they want to be resilient, or they are resilient to the reality of gun violence, seeing it man, it's gonna happen, and I'm gonna deal with it. I could bounce back, but if I find them, I'm gonna get them too. I hear things like that. But then dealing with the emotions behind that, they don't want to deal with that. They don't want to go there. Then when you try to dig into the system, then it all emerges. The system has become resilient to,
or calloused.
Yeah, callous.
Desensitized. Would you say?
Desensitized. But in my mind, it's a form of resilience to death. This death in our family has been consistent. We don't talk about it. We don't mourn. We'll go to the funeral. We'll cry a little bit. But after that, we're done with that. Let's move on. But no facing head on the emotions.
Not really healing.
Right.
I guess.
Healing. Yeah. Absolutely.
And then with that, I guess would you say that's a distinctive between being resilient and growing resiliency versus denial, like
Absolutely.
The healing? Okay.
Absolutely. I think it's something that's more prevalent than I think people realize. Again, having a bounce back is one thing, but when you bounce a ball on the wall, it bounces, it hits the wall, but it comes back.
With some speed.
Right, with some speed. But what's happening between hitting the wall and coming back? I think that's what a lot of people don't like to.
Well, and so maybe talking in terms of building resiliency from a systems perspective, like what what are appropriate ways and I think even expectations of and normalization of, because I liked what you said earlier about the rhythm, that it is going to be a rhythm of obstacles and setbacks and challenges and losses. So those are normal. But yeah, how would you describe building that resiliency in the context of a system of family?
I would say, the big thing is and some of this is CBD, how do you think about what's happening? So when you hit a wall, when there's a bump in the road, in our region, we know what happens when a bump in the road. Some people, they release expletives. Some people make a phone call, they call the city with the new program they have. Some people, they're oblivious to it. They feel it and they just keep going.
Doesn't matter to them,
Doesn't matter to them. Some people, they realize it once their car starts smoking. We all have a different response. But I think the biggest thing is, how do we think about what's happening? What's the first thing comes to your mind when you hit a bump in the road? That you have to examine that and acknowledge it. Don't ignore it. I tell people all the time, you can get so used to the bump on Poplar Avenue that it becomes a part of the road, that when the road's paved, you don't even notice the road's paved, that they paved the road. And subconsciously, you might say, something felt different, and you just keep going on. That's what we want to make sure impact. So acknowledging that there's a bump in the road.
Well, and to keep up with the metaphor, if you don't drive anywhere, you're not going to hit the bump.
That's a whole other issue.
Right. So, it implies that there's forward motion. You're moving towards something, you have a destination, which means you're inevitably going to encounter bumps in the road.
Absolutely. Yeah, and even to go back, what is your goal for your life?
Right.
Knowing I have something that I'm working towards in my life, and on this journey, I'm going to have bumps in the road. So just thinking about the reality that bumps are going to be in the road. If you always think things are going to be perfect, that could be a challenge. I think another thing is for the family system is having conversations. I think people lack the desire to even have conversations. Just have a talk. So one of the things I do with my clients is when the families, I try to initiate what I call emotional check-ins. At minimum once a week, emotional check-ins. All I want you to do is ask each other, how are you feeling and why? This is not a therapy session. This is just to air it out. And then when you hear things, parents, you take note of that and you make sure, revisit it individually with the child if it's more than one child in the home. Emotional check-ins, something I do, with my daughter and my son. We didn't do it this morning because Daddy overslept. And long day yesterday, but we usually on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, emotional check-ins. Sometimes it's on the go, sometimes it's when we're eating breakfast. How you feeling today? Tell us why. So I just got some new toys. I got the emotional wheel. My son loves the emotional wheel. This little thing, and he'll put on there, 3 years old. People say, how does he know? How does he know even explain that? I said, I taught him. I had conversations. Our daughter, same thing. She's doing that. And we have conversations. So that's another thing I always tell people. But also follow the conversations up with some dialogue and dissecting what you discuss. Another thing, and then I'll stop here, is to make sure you provide emotional space. Not only emotional space, a safe emotional space for them to emote, for them to express how they feel about, not the conversation. Because the conversation is more scheduled. But what's the system? So am I raising a child that's going to feel emotionally safe to say, Dada, I'm upset. My son calls me Dada. I'm upset because my toy is not working. How I respond to that tells him whether it's a safe environment or not. If I say, oh, just go and fix it, just figure it out. He then learns, this is not safe to tell my dad, my toy is not working, So then I say, if I can't do it immediately, hey buddy, listen, why don't you look at it for a moment, tell me what you think could be wrong, Daddy's gonna help you in a minute. Usually if I'm not able to help him. Other than that, I get in the moment and I try to help him in the moment and say, let's see what's wrong with it, okay? So, and then I usually hold and say, all right, so this toy is not working, right? And he communicates, yeah, ain't not working. I said, did you do everything to make sure it works? Did you press the button? I don't know. Well, let's try. I try to walk him through that. So even in that, I'm building resilience for him, not for being 3, but when he's 30. When something's not working, you don't throw a temper tantrum. If you go to work and something's not working, I don't come in here and fall on the floor. It's like, it's not working. Something's wrong. But I walk through, okay, what can I do to see where it's at? So that's 3 things for free. How,
well, that's not for free. You paid a lot of money to get that education. No, I think not avoiding it, the correlation or the relationship between victimhood versus realization, as you're talking, and we've used the language of being responsive versus reactive,
right?
Because I do think there's a train of thought and even a opposition to which is appropriate opposition to the thought of like, well, this is what I'm feeling, therefore. And that's not what we're advocating. What we're saying is you do have an emotional reaction, and then how do I move in a responsible and productive manner in light of that emotional response? Right. So the emotional response is informative, but it's not it's not controlling my behavior, or we don't want it to. Right. So what you're describing in the midst for all of us is going, okay, I do not like this. I don't, I tell people all the time, I don't like my emotions most of the time, and they're inevitable. Right. So how do I move in a responsible and I would add resilient way to that? They're not going to kill me. They're not going to overpower me. Right. They don't need to be the head of the table, but they have a seat at the table, kind of thing. So and I guess that relationship between moving into resiliency, and I don't know if this is appropriate necessarily to put these two against one another, but versus victimhood, that whole mindset that life is happening to me versus something's happening for me. Right. Even for those that are madly irritated about the potholes, and some say, well, I'm going to take a step toward solution versus ranting on social media or just complaining or whatever. Yeah. So I don't know how you would maybe bridge that gap or that between victimhood and resiliency.
I would add what's happening to me, and the next step would be how is it affecting what's going on through me? Because I think a lot of times when we see people act out in their emotions, that's them pushing the emotions out and not letting the process of emotional regulation happen. How is what I'm experiencing, feeling, happening through me? Even, the new thing now that everyone's talking about is how is it making you feel, somatic.
Right.
But seriously, when you think about how we are resilient, some of it is also what is happening through me physically, mentally, psychologically, emotionally, all that. And so even before we even try to get to the solving it, how do I acknowledge that made me so upset? My mouth got dry, my stomach started turning, my face got screwed up, I tensed up, and I walked in the office, all these physical things, and was like, are you okay? They don't know what just happened, but they could sense that something happened. And either you walked in there, whether you thought you did or not, as the victim, because everyone else around you could feel it. We could see it. Because your face is screwed and you're tense, your fist is balled up. How is what's happening impacting you, what's going on through you? I think that's something important too. That's something I'm getting into with my clients now, and the more we get into that, they realize, so I need to have control of that too, absolutely. Because see, a lot of people, they get to that solution, but they're still a victim. They're still a victim emotionally, internally, physically. They're carrying around a weight. You've ever heard people say, I have a knot in my throat, or a knot in my stomach? You can come and sit with me for an hour and still leave with a knot. Right. But we got to figure out how do we get you through that. So I would say you're right. I think the victimhood to get into the solution to being resilient, I would add the step of how do you assess and accept and walk through what's going through you.
Yeah, I think there's more to be said on that whole idea of regulation, because that is an intermediate step. And I think what what culturally, what many of us, what we might be reacting to is when we see people acting out of their unregulated emotions, and then we blame the emotions versus the lack of maturity or regulation to move into something productive. And as you started out with the family system, if it's either going to dysregulate, it's either going to amplify it or it's going to de-escalate and help regulate it. And even that example you described with your son of like creating a space to help provide for regulation. What does it look like to regulate strong emotions? Because they're going to come, and we don't always know when they're, well, I'm pretty sure we don't know when they're coming. So I think that's really, I think that kind of puts a bow on the conversation a little bit around how systemic or family systems can provide that space of regulation, which can help lead to more resiliency, because it's almost like we're saying, you can handle this. Like, you are going to be okay. That's not okay. The pandemic's not okay. The broken toy's not okay. Everything in between's not okay. And you're going to be okay. You're built for this. So, man, good stuff.
Yes, sir.
Great to be with you.
Yes,
Thanks
sir.
for taking the time to share with us and some of your experience.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, appreciate you very much.
Yes, sir.